Good evening and welcome to the Norwood School Committee meeting of Wednesday, November 8th. We're coming to you remotely tonight. We are officially calling this, I am officially calling this to order as of 8:05 p.m. We only have one agenda item this evening, and it is to discuss the warrant article that is slated to go before a town meeting upcoming on the compensated absences. I've got to double check what warrant article that is. So just to kind of frame the discussion, Article 18. Thank you. Article 18. Thank you for your notes, Teresa. Just to frame the discussion, so to kind of recap things that have happened around this. When did we get back in October, kind of towards the end of October, a few weeks ago, we received a memo from the town manager about compensated absences and the liability to the town based on the compensated absences. It was something that had been discussed in the Finance Commission meetings and had been discussed as initially, I think, back in August. And then was mentioned at one point during BBC meetings, but I don't think we had we did not have a lengthy discussion about it. We received the memo in October 2nd, not 22nd, I apologize, October 2nd, about the compensated absences and what the payouts were for the various departments. It did, mention that if we were to go forward with a warrant article, creating a compensated absences fund, what that would look like and what that would do. Unfortunately, through a little bit of a breakdown in communication, the warrant article was brought forward and it was never really never directly discussed with the school committee. It wasn't, sent to us as something we should discuss and we should have, a discussion over and vote on. Unfortunately, that's why we're here tonight. So this is something that has been brought forward. It has been approved by the selectmen to go on the town warrant. As I said, it is Article 18. It is creating a compensated absences fund. Part of the reason to do this is because as far as audits go and our correct me, our
bond rating.
Bond rating. Thank you. That is exactly what I was looking for. And our bond rating goes, when we're audited, they look at the total amount that we could be liable. So the liability on the books is every single person that works for the town and the schools and every department and every corner, and what they could be paid out if they were to all leave at one time in sick leave, buyback, and vacation time. So that is what this, for as far as like our bond rating and what our our credit looks like to to be able to get borrowing on projects in the town. So it's not something that we necessarily deal with year to year in the schools. We have a mechanism to pay for our separation leave for our teachers and others who have it contractually obligated to them. However, as far as, like I said, thinking of it as credit, as far as our bond rating, it doesn't matter that we have that. The liability on the books is much, much greater than that. So in order to try to combat that, and I am paraphrasing. So again, we have Maya Bodenhofer from the Finance Commission joining us this evening for questions. In order to combat that, the idea was to create a fund that has an amount of money into it that could be paid towards these separation costs if and when they arise, and it would help to offset that liability so that when you're looking at our bond rating, it's a much more favorable position that we are in as a town. So again, unfortunately, there's been a bit of some missteps and miscommunication around that. We did not realize as a school committee until reading the yellow sheets that specifically called out and schools that we were expected, to participate in this, or that was the anticipation that in order to further reduce the liability that we would be included in this. So that is kind of in a nutshell where we have landed um, with this current article. So tonight we need to discuss as a school committee, decide if we are going to vote yay or nay that we are going to support this at town meeting next week, because that would be the first step. Obviously, we need to discuss this and kind of what that means for us, if anything, and kind of go from there. As as we've kind of sent out in some notes, we're not obligated to join with this. We do have a mechanism already to make sure that we cover those separation costs. However, it could be beneficial, not only to us but to the town. So it's something that we should definitely discuss and decide if we want to support.
So I would add that when it comes to the MTA and state retirement systems, that the push over the past 20 years from the teacher side, which again, this is not judgment, it's simply observation, that, we give teachers, part of it is their sick time and absences that they're able to accrue. That the trend has been since the early 2000s is that districts don't reimburse people for that, or when you retire, it's a much limited rate. You reimburse, but it's much limited. So again, 20 years ago, maybe you're a 30 or 35 year teacher, you walk away with 250 or 300 days, and you may come away with $20,000 or $30,000. So the state began to clamp down on that in the early 2000s. So that's that portion. The second portion that I have a real issue with is, this is the first that we're really hearing about this. So I understand these conversations have come through, but for the town on, a week out from the meeting to tell us or to hear about the compensated absences, for it to be this slow when the town meeting is next week that they're going to determine this, is frustrating. And the third thing that I will also say is when we talk about bond rating and finances, I recognize that things are tied into that. But again, I will say town funding versus funding when it comes to public education in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is apples and oranges. The apple is that the state very, very specifically, for a number of different reasons, makes schools outline the money that they spend much more than towns. I will also say on the town side, speaking from Norwood the past year, I have a lot of concerns when it comes to compensated absences. There was a warrant on the article in the spring for a manager of a department who was retiring, who was not retiring, actually forced to retire due to their age, which is an outlined state law. And the only way that you are allowed for someone to serve over that is through approval from the state legislature, which said no to this for $50,000. So my question is, when the town makes mistakes, why do the schools have to pay? Because we have not made a mistake here. There was communication from the town side that I would feel, again, as an elected official who oversees schools, I would use the word inappropriate that was sent to us around some of these issues, where I don't know that that's the right forum to do it in. So I want to be clear. I hear what you're saying. I appreciate that we're here to talk about this issue. And Maev, I appreciate your time and your attention to detail to this as always. However, I have a lot of questions as how we got to here a week out, when I think these are things that are ongoing. They're dynamic, not static. And I think that a lot of them are actually managed pretty well. So I don't know who in the group can sort of speak to that, but that's my question right now.
So we did bring Maev here to help, speak to some of those questions. So would you prefer she answer those questions, David? Is that okay with you? If
whoever has the knowledge, if you both want to answer it, that's just my confusion.
Right. I gave my synopsis, but if Maev, if you want to jump in and kind of talk about where this came from, and I know I have Kate and then Teresa. Or Kate, put your hand down.
Sure. I'd like to step back a little bit. I think that I want to be clear that the town is not asking for any money at this point to cover any compensated absences. The state law recognizes that compensated absences, both on general government side and on school side, vary greatly from year to year. And so similar to how there's special laws about how like snow and ice is handled, you're allowed to overspend on snow and ice because it's so unpredictable. The state law allows for compensated absences to be treated a little bit differently. About 10 years ago, the state law was amended to allow for a compensated absences reserve fund. And if you have a compensated absences reserve fund, then both general government and the schools can just charge all their employee separation costs related to vacation and sick time to the compensated absences reserve fund. And when you do that, that means that you don't have to have it worry about its impact on your budget year to year, because there would be this large fund. This is something that Mr. Mizuko had mentioned to FinCom years ago. And then this year in the summer, it became clear that there was going to be a significant amount of free cash this year. So FinCom was asking Meg LeMay, all right, if we've got a lot of free cash, how could we use that in a responsible way to set ourselves up to have better, smoother budgets going forward? And one of the things that she said is, well, if you can fund a compensated absences reserve, then that would be a great way to do it. That was something that was discussed with our financial advisors, and they said, compensated absences fund looks like a reserve fund in the same way like a stabilization fund or the general purpose stabilization fund, the override stabilization fund, all of that stuff. Those all count as things that are like assets against the town's liabilities. So the town liability overall for compensated absences is more than $2 million. And this would be a way to set aside some money that would then help smooth out some budgets going forward. So honestly, it's a little bit more beneficial to the general government than it is to the schools, because the schools have bottom line authority and you guys can move money around from year to year. From account to account within the year. On the general government side, the budgeting is a little bit trickier because they do it, like department by department. Salaries are budgeted department by department. So if you have a department with 2 or 3 employees, you put enough money in there to pay their salaries for the year. But if then somebody leaves and they have a vacation or sick time that they get paid out at the end of the year, then it overruns that part of that budget. It doesn't necessarily overrun the town budget in general, the general government budget in general, but it overruns that line item. And there's a lot of reserve fund, there's a lot of transfers that have to happen at the end of the year to compensate for that. So there's a little bit of an administrative hassle on the general government side that they would love to avoid. But the idea is we would put $1.5 million into this reserve fund. And then whenever the schools, and then if the schools choose to participate, then you can take, right now you've got for this year, fiscal year, $56,000 in employee separation costs built into your budget. In FY25, you wouldn't have to put anything in your budget for employee separation costs. It wouldn't reduce your budget. It would just mean you wouldn't have to budget for employee separation costs. You could just use the compensated absences reserve fund and draw money from that fund when you do like the final paycheck for an employee who's leaving.
So, and I appreciate that, but to that point is that cities and towns, when it comes to teachers, have limited what we pay back. So we used to, like the Mass Teachers Union and the retirement system handles that. So I appreciate your honesty and clarifying that, but what this sounds like is that the town sees an issue and wants us to jump into it. Like, you have to declare in the Massachusetts teachers retirement system in December if you are retiring. There's a certain amount of money that has to go in. There are transfers that are made. There is a system that is in place. So
yes, there's a system is in place, but one of the things is like according to the way it works for teachers, they have to notify by a certain period of time.
Yes.
And they can wait. If the district doesn't have money to pay them that year, they can be forced to wait till the next year. But this time you'd never have to wait till the next year because there'd be more than enough money there. And it's true that there's the retirement stuff is handled at the state level, but the sick time payout, that's handled at the local level.
Yes, and again, the trend has been since 2000 that cities and towns across the Commonwealth, as well as the state, have greatly reduced what teachers can make off of that. The days are not compensated. Yes, I've worked in 3 districts, and this is how it works. They pay
But it's
you
the
less.
school committee
There's
that
a certain
assigns
amount.
those. It's
But-
the school
but-
committee that negotiates those contracts. That's
correct. But
the-
my thing here is that it's the lack of faith of the school committee to be able to do that. Again, the last question that I would have is, I hear this, but is this because there was a $50,000 warrant for someone who was kept on longer
No.
than they should have been, that town meeting did approve to pay out, and you're looking to penalize us? Or is this legitimate planning?
I don't
That's
see
my
any
question.
way in which the schools are penalized here.
No, it comes to schools. It's, we're going to do this. We want to do this. But our retirement, like, we don't have 100 teachers retire a year. And
No,
there was
David,
one person who had a lot of money that did retire. And I just find it interesting that in the last 6 to 8 months, this becomes an issue after that.
David, I just want to jump in and just want to make sure that we're separating that the like retirement and in the state retirement has absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about, and our ability to negotiate contracts is in no way affected by this decision. So
No, but you can't buy back all of your time. That is my thing.
You
The
can't
teachers
anyway
union has
by-
said that
but
there are
that's a school
limits.
committee. That's a school committee with the union negotiation. Has nothing to do with where the money comes
No,
from.
but I understand that. But the state also, through the teachers union, limits the number of days and the amount of time that you can buy back. That is true in Canton. That is true in Stoughton. That is true in Norwood.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think that's particularly the issue here. So we have 2 other people with their hands raised. I don't know if they have questions for Ms. Bodenhofer.
And I know you had yours up and then you put it back down, but then you put it back up. So I wanted to.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question based on listening to Maya, but my original question was just a sort of a logistical one, and that is there an option wherein we can take more time? We can say that we do not vote for this right now because we need more time with it, and because our finance department is in transition, and we would like to do some more analytics before we would opt in. If there is a benefit, I certainly don't, to the schools, I certainly don't want to walk away from that. It sounds like, and this was kind of my second question. I think, Maya, you'd said there is no decrease in our budget, meaning there's nothing taken from our budget for this.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
But then, okay, so I guess I had assumed, that we were expected to donate or to contribute. And so that part, I guess I don't understand then. But
So what is being the article before town meeting is to accept the state law and in accordance with this section of the state law. I don't have the state law in front of me right here, but to create a compensated absences reserve fund. And then FinCom is recommending that we take $1.2 million from free cash and we put it into that fund. Separately, the schools can decide as you build your FY25 budget, if you want to include money in your budget for what you call employee separation costs, which is essentially the same thing. But and then if you don't wish to put money into employee separation costs, then you can rely on this fund to pay instead.
thank you. And so I guess I would like to hear from Ms. Sheridan in terms of, well, I know Teresa has a question, but then could we hear from Ms. Sheridan? Thanks.
Teresa?
Yeah, I don't have a question. I'm trying to share information that I tried to share out in advance and apparently did not reach most people. So in our packet, I wrote 3 pages of notes trying to explain as best as I could how we got here, where some miscommunication unfortunately happened, and everything that the budget subcommittee, which is Anne Marie and myself and Dr. Thompson and Dr. Taylor and Ms. Sheridan, have been trying to figure out since we got that memo in October. And it's been very confusing in the last month, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons. So, David, I do hear your questions and your frustration, but also to Maya's point, I don't think it was intentional, the FinCom. I think there were some breakdowns elsewhere. But in the packet, just because I think it's really important, we're all talking about facts through all of this. I also went through every single union contract that we have and compiled for you the language from the contract. So, David, some of the things you were just saying aren't accurate in Norwood. So I would just reference that sheet so you can see exactly what our buyback sick leave language is for all 5 of our unions, because that is in your packet. I did also share the warrant language. I did also share the law we're looking at, which is Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 40, Section 13B. You also have access to the shared cost allocation agreement that we currently have that is going to come into play at some point with all of this. And then you have some numbers from Ms. Sheridan as well. So I just want to make sure that as we continue this conversation, everybody is looking at the packet material and the facts that I did try to compile. I think some of the challenge, at least for me, and I already spoke about this at BBC, is some of the language that is in the warrant article is a little bit different now than the conversations that we're having. And some of the things even that you're saying, Maya, and I trust you and your intent, it's different than the language. So the language in the article, there's a whole first paragraph talking about the law. I have no problem about that. I have no problem with this fund being set up. I get being fiscally responsible. Sounds like a really good thing to look into. It's the second paragraph that is my concern and is why Anne Marie and I asked for all of us to meet tonight before we go to town meeting on Monday. And the second paragraph says, the article also designates the town accountant to authorize payment from this new fund and further appropriates 1.5 million from free cash to initially capitalize the fund. Now, here's the part I have concerns about. Beginning in FY25, there will be centrally budgeted share cost amount for compensated absences for town and school department employees. That's my concern. And when I went to the FinCom meeting last Thursday to be there to support our articles and then heard this very clearly stated by Mr. Mizuko, that was an alert to me, like, wait a minute, communication has happened somewhere because the school committee wasn't informed or asked or discussed if we were agreeing to this shared cost. And then since that Thursday night meeting, we did have a BBC meeting on Monday. We worked through some of this, as Maya and Anne Marie are both sharing. The discussion on Monday was, well, schools don't have to decide right now. We have time to figure this out as part of the FY25 budget. But I do think we have to be prepared to talk about this on the town meeting floor. And I do think we have to be clear at town meeting, unless we all vote tonight that we are going to do this, we have to be clear on Monday with town meeting that may not happen. That last sentence of Article 18 may not happen.
Okay, Dave.
Yeah, so, I mean, the other part of setting up this fund is it removes the liability, which helps the town with its overall bond rating, which ultimately, if we're doing any projects, any capital project, lower loan costs help all of us for money in the budget. So there is the provision in the law to do this. I won't get into the communication problem, but again, whomever is doing this, they need to get on an agenda at a school committee meeting and have a discussion with the school committee before something is put on a warrant. That's a separate topic. We can discuss that at another time. But the real question is, obviously, the seed money is being set up to set up this fund. The real question, which we might not answer today, which might take further conversations, is how this fund will be funded going forward. That is the question that the schools need to be cognizant of and have further discussions of, because if it's a general shared cost and our impact is low, but that entire bunch of money is coming off the top, that impacts the available funds to be split later on. So that is going to have to take further discussion further down the line.
Karen?
I just was gonna go over some of my notes. So, the first thing was what a lot of people have been talking about, the future funding of this reserve fund, because that really is still up in the air. How do they determine the shared costs? Obviously, Teresa had mentioned it has to change the MOU between the town and the school for the shared cost. If there's not enough money in the fund in 1 year, how are these obligations paid, and how is it determined who's paid? Because according to the warrant article that I read, then it would be under the authority of the town, I believe, for this fund. So that's one thing. So if there's not enough money and there's a school and town, how do they determine who's going to get paid and who has to wait? With the schools, when you have the fund, when you don't have enough money in your line, obviously you can budget transfer because you have to pay those funds. So you do have that ability. But in this fund, if this fund runs out of money, you're not going to have that ability. You're going to have to go to town meeting to get it paid, I believe. The one thing that I do think it has its good points, but I guess the concerns that myself and others have, that all the logistics of this have not really been figured out yet. So I think that's why there's some concerns about it. The other thing about who's tracking the school versus town, because it definitely has to be tracked on the amount of school vacation and sick time that's paid, because that is a definite line in the end of year report. And it can't be on that line unless the MOU is changed. So that's one thing. I did confirm that with Jay Sullivan today. If the schools do not want to participate at this time, do they have the right to jump on at another later time? And then if the school decides that they're not going to participate in this, so does that mean that, so the town participates in this fund, so they know that their expenditures for these two things are going to be funded. But if the schools decide not to, so for right now, you've got money in your budget, but then in the future, you got to remember that you're going to have to make sure that you get that money in the budget. And that doesn't mean that the town's going to give you extra money in your budget to cover it. So you're going to have to find it within your budget in the amount of money that the town and the school agree to for that particular year. So you're not going to have that opportunity to go to that fund. The other thing, if there's not enough money in that reserve fund, I don't know the law. Is it still an obligation of the town if they don't have enough money in that fund? I don't know that answer. And then the other one, which I already said, was, can the school make a determination later on to jump on board and not jump on board right now with this? So those are the concerns that I have. But a lot of it, because it's new to me and I don't know that much about it, and I've been trying to frantically investigate it. But I guess the biggest concern to me is the future funding of it and the shared cost, and just some things that are still up in the air and I don't have answers for.
Live.
So there's a few questions there. Let me start by answering some of them and remind me if I've forgotten any. But the first one is, what happens if there isn't enough money in this account? What we're doing is we're moving compensated absences to be a shared cost in the same way that, like, healthcare is a shared cost, and some of the insurances and things like that, yeah. So it would move to shared costs. The plan would be that the town would be contributing some money to this fund every year and hopefully what we'll do is every year we'll put in an amount that's equal to the average amount that we spend per year. Now, we know that this number can fluctuate depending on who happens to retire, who happens to leave, how much time they had available. But so this would allow us to smooth it out. But the idea is to put in $1.5 million to start. We expect that to be at least 3 years worth of money if we didn't add anything more. But we are planning to add to it every year. So it's possible that it could run out of money, but it seems very unlikely that it would run out of money. That's part of the idea, is that we're planning to have plenty of money there so that it's not such an issue that, well, are we going to run out of money this year? Yes, this not start taking effect until FY25. So you would have till June of 2025 to make sure that you had all that worked out about how that was going to be reported. Now, I think you should figure out the accounts before that, obviously, but the cost allocation agreement doesn't really come into effect until June 30th of 2025. So we've got some time to work that out. The need for the school employees to be tracked separately from the town employees has been talked about this from the very beginning that FinCom was discussing this. That is absolutely part of the plan. So we know that this is part of the end of year report, and it will be, all that data will be available. It will be coded as such. What else did I? Oh, and then the other question is, like, can the schools opt in later? I would imagine so. Nobody has said, like, well, if you don't agree now, you can't join later. I think the question that has to be resolved right now is whether or not town meeting is going to support creating this account and support moving $1.5 million in free cash into this account. That is the question that is before us on Monday. Then the separate question of, are the schools going to participate in this, and what amount are we as a shared town going to contribute to this? That will be part of the FY25 budget discussions. That will be ongoing. Now, there is also the really good question of, how are we dividing up the pie going forward? This has been something that FinCom has been pushing really hard for budget balancing to have conversations about. I personally am quite frustrated we don't have answers to that now. I really was hoping that we were going to get further along in budget balancing than we have. For various reasons, we haven't. So I can't specifically answer that question, but I do think that, the offer on the table right now is, well, we could use this money, and then the schools could take the money that they previously used for employee separation costs and use that for something else in the FY25 budget.
Teresa?
Yeah, thanks, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Maya. So I hear, like, the order of decisions and the work that is yet to come. Again, I guess just going back to the language that's in the article, and as the Finance Commission chair and leading the discussion at town meeting and sharing what, the Finance Commission is recommending or not, just how are we reconciling that last sentence in this warrant article that does say this will be essentially budget share costs?
I do want to clarify one thing. That's not in the warrant article.
Yeah,
that's on the yellow sheet. The yellow sheet is the document that is generated and approved by the Board of Selectmen. That has nothing to do with the motion. I mean, not that it has nothing to do with the motion, but it's not that that's FinCom language. The motion before us will say nothing about what we're doing with share, like how this will be funded going forward, or whether or not the schools are participating. I don't believe. I could double check the language from the motion, but it's really just, do we want to create this fund, and do we want to fund it at $1.5 million?
Right. And that I'm on board with that discussion. And I think this is some of the miscommunication that is nobody's fault that is currently in this meeting. But we do need to bring to the attention of the Board of Selectmen, because often, this is not the first time, language gets put into yellow sheets that impact the school committee, and the school committee had no say in what was in a yellow sheet. And again, not anyone's fault in this meeting, but had I not stayed a few extra minutes in the Finance Commission meeting on Thursday and had not heard those words spoken, I would not have even known that that was at least some people's intent, and possibly would have come up on the town meeting floor. So that's not in the warrant language, but it is in the yellow sheet that all of town meeting received. So if at town meeting floor, which I know only a few of us can attend town meeting on Monday, we won't have a quorum of our school committee. If this comes up, and if town meeting members are asking us, what are our thoughts on a shared cost? Are we supporting a shared cost? Like, what is the official response of the school committee? That's what I'm looking for tonight.
Kate?
Well, I guess I'm wondering if it can be clarified in the introduction, or if there's an opportunity to say, here's just to clarify, even though the yellow sheet says this, it does not assume that the schools are going to be involved. And if we vote based on this discussion to hold, until we know more, until we're more comfortable, until we have a new finance, until we've ironed out the questions and looked at our MOUs and all of the things that we've said are sort of like to come. It seems like a reasonable option, and like the town would appreciate that, but can we introduce it with that caveat, and then to sort of introduce our reasoning about whether, or like, if that's the case, I guess I feel like if that's the case, if we can say, we can explain the yellow sheet, then I don't have any reason not to support the town creating it and giving us the option to have our discussions and do due diligence and then opt in at a later time. I don't think we would be obstructionist in that way. I think we're just don't want to be pulled into it without having further looks. I'm sorry, Anne Marie, were you texting to my comment?
No. I just put in the chat the actual language from the warrant article, just for reference.
Okay, does it mention the schools or doesn't?
It does not.
Okay.
No, and I was just looking at the actual warrant. I'm sorry, Anne Marie, is it all right if I jump in?
Oh yes, please.
All right. So the actual motion that FinCom will say Thursday night, Monday night. I'm confused what day it is. That the town vote to accept the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 13D, to authorize the town to establish a reserve fund for the future payment of accrued liabilities for compensated absences due to any employee or full-time officer of the town upon termination of the employee or full-time officer's employment, and further to designate the town accountant to authorize payment from such fund, and further to appropriate $1.5 million from free cash to capitalize this fund. After I read that motion, I will then speak to the motion as the chair of FinCom. If I'm doing a couple of slides to explain what compensated absences are, what we're talking about this liability and why this would be beneficial to the town. And if you want me to include some language that says, the school committee is currently discussing whether or how they will participate, I can add some language like that.
I think that would be good. David?
So I hear that, and it's not that the idea is not good, but this is born out of the idea is that we have a debt that we carry year to year on the potential of people retiring or leaving. In Massachusetts, in the retirement system, so Dave, as you had said, I know you know this and I get it, but if you leave a district, so like if you retire, you're on the hook for that. But individual contracts within cities and towns limit the number of days you can buy back and limit the number that we will pay you for. The other thing, so for instance, let's say we have 15 teachers in Norwood or employees for the public schools that have, let's say, over 120 sick days, what have you, that may be a liability. If they resign or they move to another district, that's not our liability. My issue isn't that I don't think this is a good idea. My issue is that it's November and this is the first conversation we're having at school committee with this. That's thing one. And thing two is, I don't know the town retirement side, but again, there was a communication that came out of compensated absences that was sent from someone on the town side that I think crossed an ethical line. I can't and don't have clarification on if it is, but that's my issue. Once again, the Mass Teachers Retirement System, the way that teacher funding is set up is incredibly regulated. The town side is very much less so. And I still have not heard something clear as to, I get it's potential absences if people leave, but there is a system in place that handles this. And the fact that the town is asking for $1.5 million for this, I think is punitive for us for things that, conversations we were not a part of or privy to, and things that the town is knee-jerking reaction to, that again is not the fault of the schools.
Dave?
Yeah. So I think we need to separate some of the things here. So first, the town is looking to solve a problem allowable under the law that will increase the town's bond rating. That is one issue. They are setting up a fund. They are taking 1.5 million out of free cash to set up that fund. Okay.
Show me the numbers for the town and the school side, and they'll have a better
We have
argument.
them in the memo.
They're in the memo that was sent on October 2nd, or at least.
But hold
the-
up, they're not the correct numbers, as I pointed
Right.
out in my summary document.
They-
So
We got clarification on that.
Right. So that's another issue. Okay. So that's issue one. The ongoing conversation has got to be about the funding of that going forward, but at least I don't think that the school committee taking a vote to not support the town getting rid of a liability is necessarily, you can say, we need to have a deep and integrated conversation about how this is going forward, going to be funded going forward, but that's a separate issue than creating and funding the account. There is another issue here that needs to be dealt with. There should not be anything that is put on a town meeting warrant or any place else that mentions the word schools without it coming to the school committee and the school committee voting on it before it goes anywhere. That is fundamentally, that is the deeper issue, but that's not what we need to decide tonight.
Fine, but the decision is with those numbers, and Teresa, thank you, is the town side is still 3 times as much. So my question again is, why are we being penalized, or why are you asking for 3 times the amount when the town side is 3 times the amount? When
No one's being penalized in this first creation of the.
we are. This is the first conversation we've had about this publicly in
That's
school
not a
committee
penalty.
meeting. I'm not saying that we didn't have it in finance, but
First, we're hearing about it is a very different than being penalized. So I just want to clarify that those are not even remotely related.
in your opinion, I like
In
yes,
factuality and the,
fine, but yes, it's a liability. We create a reserve fund. There are ways to cover this. I'm not saying that it's not a good idea. I'm saying that the town runs with, we have this problem, we want to solve it, and we're going to lump schools into it. That's
I also want to just remind this board and just remind this board that bond rating has a big impact on school projects, like middle school projects and elementary study potential projects. So, I mean, this is not just a town thing when you think about bond rating. Unfortunately, it's not, because, school projects absolutely depend on bond rating, and we will not get them done without a good bond rating. So this is more than, and I understand what you're saying, because I had these conversations. These are the same things that I brought up, around your like town versus schools. But when you think of it in that perspective, that's a very big deal. An audit finding came out and said we have a liability between all facets of the town, not just the general government.
It was a town audit.
It included teachers, because it's a town. We are a town. We're the town of Norwood. Norwood Public Schools is in the town of Norwood. That's a fact. We are funded by the town taxpayers of the town of Norwood.
And we're funded by the state, who has a specific formula. And I understand you may disagree. I am school side 100% because my bias is that I'm in schools. But we got $4 million in the spring, and the town took $1 million. And it was based on a state formula that is per pupil spending. So I hear what you're saying, but I just want to be clear yet again. Town audit, we were not involved in the conversation. It's not to say that it's not a bad idea, but yet again, look at the numbers. This is a town side issue that are asking us to come in with no conversation and no real part of the process, as Dave had said, until a week before they're going to vote on this article.
Okay, agreed. and a couple of people have their hands raised, agreed that it's a week before. Totally agree with that. Not disputing it, so we can move on from that. The next part of it being a town issue versus schools is not accurate, because bond rating affects us as schools. So an audit that looks at all of it, whether it found an issue or any other issues besides this anywhere else, one of the things that was flagged was town-wide, and that includes every employee that's paid through town taxes, including the state funding stuff, is there is a liability on the books that affects our bond rating, which affects our ability to do projects in the future, including school projects. So I'm looking at it through that lens, that putting aside the logistical stuff, which I absolutely agree with. I'm not even trying to argue that there's a, this piece, like I feel the us versus them on several things. This piece is not an us versus them. This is us as a whole town, and our ability to do school projects going forward, because our bond rating is not up to snuff. And that's an audit finding. That's not just on the town side. That's
fine, but
that's
and there are alternate ways to raise those things, and we're looking at it through one lens.
Well, I'm just trying to
It's a
explain.
challenge.
I'm trying to explain through the conversations that we've had with BBC and some other conversations on the side, that there isn't, because of the liability for the bond rating doesn't give a crap that we budget for separation costs each year. It doesn't matter, because that budgeting for separation costs is a separate issue from the bond rating. So that's from the liability that affects the bond rating. So I'm just trying to explain that that's not, we budget it, we pay it 100%. That's not the issue, because according to those who give us the bond rating, the liability is still there, because they're looking at if every freaking person in the entire town, teacher and police and fire, just ups and quits one day, what our liability is. So that's what this is for. Maya?
So I just want to be clear that this is not a town choice to calculate this liability. We, on an annual basis, have to get a financial statement about the entire town, including the schools. And we get graded by the bond rating agencies. And part of the thing is they look at our total liabilities and they look at our total assets. And any employer who offers sick time and vacation time is going to have a compensated absences liability. Anything that has been accrued but not yet paid out counts as a liability on your balance sheet. So that's not like a choice that this is how we're doing it. It just is. And so this is just an opportunity to say, like, hey, we have a significant windfall of free cash. We want to be clear that sure that we're not just spending this on all sorts of things that we might think we want. Let's use this in a wise way to solve some problems going forward. We thought that the schools, by including the schools, it was going to be beneficial to the schools. Is it slightly more beneficial to the general government? Yes, but it's still beneficial to the schools. And I would recommend that I definitely recommend that we work out all the details that you need to work out. But I also recommend that you agree to this in the future and take the money.
So then my question is, when for FY23, the school total is $83,637.51, and the town is $391,069.76, when the town was audited, and this was one of multiple flags that were given on the town side, that we are then lumped into this. My problem isn't that I don't think it's a good idea.
It's not an audit finding that we did anything wrong. It's just a statement that these are liabilities that are there.
Yes,
and then this number
the town is audited, and this is a bigger budget conversation around not just this, but that from the report that I read when the town was audited, that there were conclusions that were drawn in that audit around people in the town and what they were paid and all of this. So I want to be clear. I'm not saying you're wrong, and we can have different opinions on this. But the town, where all the money is dumped into, despite the fact that there are other formulas and other ways that schools are funded, you know, I understand no retirement is not directly related to it, but compensated time is, because that is through the union and through teachers and the MTRS, is that the town saw this as an issue, chose to have a conversation, brought us in late, and is now asking for 3 times the amount in that fund. So there are questions there. I'm not saying that it's bad and I'm not saying that it's worth it, but we blow through, and often, and in my time on the school committee, we have taken shots for the town that I don't think are fair. And this is one that, again, I think is on that line. It's not that it's not good fiscal policy, but it's the town is 4-1. We're going to drag the schools along with this without a conversation. That is my frustration.
The 3 times amount is because it's a reserve fund. We want this money to have a nice cushion so that if something happens and you have a weird year, then you're just going to have extra money available, and then we'll just contribute
Great.
every year.
So when we come in 2025 and we ask for 3, 5, and 7% as a general budget to think about things that are weird as we've happened, is the town going to agree to that with us?
The FY25 budget is a separate conversation, but if you look at the budget projections that have been made for budget balancing, we've talked about adding money for additional positions for buses for the middle school, additional positions for the middle school teachers that will be hired, additional positions to fund the ESSER fund grant money that's going away. There's a lot that's on the table to add to the school budget. And one of the things that we're looking at with free cash is saying, like, oh, if we're looking at our projections right now, we're looking at a $2.5 million budget shortfall in FY25. That's our forecast. It's not a set number, but that's like our best forecast. And we're saying, like, let's set aside $2.5 million in free cash so that we can offset that cost. So that's part of our plan as well, is to make sure that we don't have to cut services in FY25. That's also part of the conversation.
All right, I want to give others a chance to ask questions. Teresa? Oh, you're muted.
Muted.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
I just raised my hand again instead of unmuting. So a couple things. One, I would just caution us to remember what was the posted item for discussion tonight, because we're getting off topic. But with that said, it's very important and valuable discussion that needs to happen. And I think, and we've talked about this a little bit in BBC, and Anne Marie and I have been trying to bring it back to the school committee when we report out. But there's a lot of really hard decisions ahead. And a budget climate that I think we all wish could be different, and the override ending, and et cetera. There's a lot of ands. And I think what needs to be done is we need to have meetings like we did back in 2017 and 2018 when we brought all 3 boards together. Maya, I'm sure you remember those long Saturdays that we spent together. I think it needs to happen again, because we're at a place where we all have to have open, honest, transparent discussions. And some of the work has to be done in BBC for sure, but I think we need the 3 boards together. I think there's protocols we need to agree to on how we're moving forward, just in working with each other, because it's fallen apart a little bit over the years. And I think we need to review our financial policies that we worked collectively as the 3 boards on in 2018. I don't think everybody understands all the financial policies, and we probably need to do that. And I also wonder, Maya, is it possible for that audit to be shared out with the school committee? We've asked before, and we not to you, but we've asked other people to share the audit with us, and we've never gotten it, because it seems like that's going to be a reference point in some financial decisions going forward. So the school committee should probably be equally informed on that audit. And I know Kate wants to say something, but I also just want to remind us we were supposed to wrap up by 9, and we still need to briefly go into executive session. So we probably should soon have a motion on the table.
Yeah, I think that we're close. I think that the town would not fault us, and we would certainly be doing our due diligence if we, again, said that we wanted to take time to decide on participation, but that we have no objection to the town moving forward, but we would like for it to be clear that the schools are still working on and with our finance department to figure out what makes sense in terms of what's required of us, in terms of what our numbers look like. I think that it's a logical step forward to keep the conversation going. So in terms of emotion, I think that I would rather somebody put it forward. I mean, I think I'm saying I want us to actually, Teresa, how did you how is the meeting topic agenda item stated? Like, what do we need to phrase it around?
Yeah,
'Cause-
we just put discussion and vote on warrant article 18 at because we already had a discussion on warrant articles before, and this one wasn't one that came to our attention, but now it is. So I think we just need an official stance so that Kay, that you and I and Dr. Taylor know on Monday, if questions are arising, what are we saying on behalf of the school committee? So I think what you are trying to articulate.
Okay. Yeah, I think I would just make a motion to ask that the chair of the FinCom address the language in the yellow sheet for the benefit of town meeting, and that school committee is going to take at this time is going to take our time to evaluate the information, that we want more time with it because we haven't had it for that long, and that we will decide what we're going to do in terms of participation. When does that need to be decided? I'm sorry, I'm unclear on that. When would you need to know?
It would be as we're working on the FY25 budget, because the
As
shared
we
cost allocation agreement takes effect July 1 of 2024.
Okay, so then that would be part of our discussions for the next year's budgeting process.
Just to clarify, I'll get you one second, Karen. Does anyone want to second that for the purposes of discussion?
So moved.
Clarification question. Are we saying that as a school committee, we support the town moving forward with this article and we just don't know whether we're going to join it yet? Or is that just if we're asked at town meeting?
I mean, based on the information that I've served, I don't know why we would not, like we would say we're not in favor of the town moving forward with it for the reasons that they've put out. I think we can separately decide what's best for the schools, but I don't, as long as Maya addresses it in terms of the language here, most of the town meeting isn't even going to know that this is an issue for us.
No,
I mean, to be quite honest. So as long some people will, some really, attentive people will. So for the sake of the record, for the sake of us, and those folks, I think we should move to have it addressed and clarified so that it's clear and as to what our moving forward plan is.
Okay, Karen, go ahead.
I just want, if it was that the communication between the town and school took place to determine what the future shared cost would be, would that be something that everybody would be on board with it?
I think that's really what's the sticking point, really, for me anyway. I mean, I think it's a great idea. I just think that what we don't understand is what that part of the shared cost allocation agreement, does that then, from my understanding of the shared cost, then it kind of takes, that's the pool that happens first and then the rest gets divided after. And so that could mean that our budget gets lowered because that's what's left. Right. So that's what the concern was for me. We can say that this year we're not gonna, we can use that money towards something else because we've got this fund. That's great. Or FY25, but actually when the shared cost agreement allocation agreement gets, finalized, is there, now that that's been taken off the top, is there now less of a pool to divvy out? And so that was my concern. Teresa. Because
with the special education reserve fund, it's very clear that the school committee and the town jointly make decisions on what is spent in that. So that's why I'm saying if there was some type of agreement that the school committee was also involved in this shared cost, would that be something that would make it go forward? Because it's that's the difference between this particular one. It's not as clear as the other one is. The other one is very clear. The school committee votes the money in, the school committee and the town vote the money out. And this one is a little vague. And I think that's what the concern is.
So I may be just stepping on Maya here, but my understanding from our discussions that we had after at BBC was that it's basically a a code in Munis that if you code it to a separation cost, it just pulls from that account. It's not it's not that anyone has to vote it in. And well, we'd have to vote it in. I don't know. Actually, that's a good question.
Well, to give
Voting it
money,
in is one thing. Voting it, we don't have to vote it out. It's not a vote out like not school committee, not selectmen, not town meeting, and in some kind of a
no, I'm
hand-holding,
talking,
yeah,
that's
we
what
don't
I'm
have to-
talking. I'm not talking about that. I know, I'm talking about to put more money in the fund. Because the future is to have shared cost. So in order to, I'm assuming, how are they going to future fund this particular thing? So that's what I'm saying. It's going to be a shared cost amount for the compensated absences.
So Maya, correct me, but it would just be like the healthcare
Average,
in
Well, it's like right. It would be like all of our shared costs. They're always discussed by the budget balancing committee. So how much money are we putting in workman's comp? And then how much money are we putting in health insurance? Now, health insurance is pretty much set by the, our calculation of rates, but we have sometimes talked about, should we separate out how much of that is schools and how much of that is town? That's not been part of our conversation for health insurance or for workman's comp or for for OPEB, stuff like that. But the conversation about how much money are we putting into shared expenses is absolutely part of budget balancing every year. In the same way, there's some money in there for capital items, and that's how like some of the school vans were funded. Those are funded as shared costs through capital, the capital that went into the operating budget through shared costs, and that was used to fund school vans. So there's those conversations will happen every year, and then town meeting will approve those shared costs.
Teresa.
Yeah, I mean, this is just bringing so many different topics and areas that need to be worked on, coming up. But I'm not comfortable, and Anne Marie, I don't know if I was understanding everything you were saying clearly or not, but I'm not comfortable with the school committee at this time saying, yes, we agree to this being created, and yes, we're going to join, but we're going to figure out the mechanisms later. I am comfortable with the motion that Kate put on the table. We'll support the motion with the clarification from Maev, and we need time to figure it out.
That's what I was saying. That's what I was clarifying, that we
Okay.
support the warrant, but not that we're joining it, but we support the town's putting forward of the warrant as, but we're not, we still need to decide if we're going to join up with it.
Okay, just want to
That
clarify.
was what I was clarifying, that if anyone asks at town meeting, well, does the school support this? Well,
Yes.
yeah, we support it, but we don't know if we're joining it yet. It's that, I want to make sure that that's clear if the schools are asked.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So, okay. So any other, so anyone need to repeat the motion? Because I might need to read back if we need it repeated. But I think Teresa pretty much summed it up. Is there any other discussion on it? Okay, so we'll vote. So I'll start at the top. Kate,
Sorry. Yes.
Teresa,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. So that passes 4-0. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Anne Marie, I'm working on the presentation for town meeting right after I get off this meeting. So I will send you a draft of the slide about what the school position is, and feel free to share any feedback with me.
Okay, perfect. And thank you for joining us tonight.
All right, thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay, so that actually wraps up our regular meeting, unless anybody, I just want to make sure, and AOB, I know we can't do that off if it doesn't list it on the agenda, but just want to make sure before we move on that no one has anything else to discuss. Perfect. So unfortunately, we do need to jump into executive session for a short executive session. We will only reconvene for the purpose of adjournment. I do need a motion to go into executive session.
Before we do that, is there another link?
That's a great question.
No, there's not.
Okay.
Should we just hang on to this one until everybody's off?
Move to go into executive session.
Seconded.
Second by Teresa. Okay. Kate,
Yes.
Teresa,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
And I am a yes as well, so that passes 4-0. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and we will have a regularly scheduled school committee meeting next week, Wednesdays, November 15th, in the school committee room hybrid meeting. Did I say that right? November 15th? Yes, November 15th. Thank you.